Some houses hide secrets until the night they burn. David Sterling was the quiet man next door.
Perfect piece of oak, lived on a cul-de-sac of meticulously manicured lawns and identical colonial homes. His was a life of quiet routines. The morning coffee brewed at precisely 6, the perfectly knotted tie, the wave to the neighbor as he backed his immaculate car from the driveway. He was a successful architect, a creator of spaces and structures, yet the only space he truly inhabited was the one he had built around himself, a fortress of polite detachment. Sarah, his wife, was the vibrant counterpoint to his stillness. She was all color and noise, a cascade of laughter and impromptu projects. She had filled their home with life, from the mismatched, cozy furniture to the riot of her children's toys that seemed to sprout from every corner. Lily, their 8-year-old daughter, was a miniature Sarah, a whirlwind of boundless curiosity and an artist's soul, always with a crayon clutched in her hand. Sam, 6, was a quiet, earnest boy who adored his father, a child who would often sit silently in David's studio, just watching him draw. Their existence was a beautiful, chaotic masterpiece, a world that David had helped build but had never truly lived in. He had come to see it not as a home but as a cage. The debt was the final, unyielding lock. His architectural firm was on the brink. The lucrative contracts had dried up, the market had turned, and the overheads were devouring him. He had tried to hide it, pouring more money into the facade, the new car, the landscaping, the expensive family vacations that he had to put on credit. The stress was a physical weight, pressing down on him until he felt he could no longer breathe. He saw Sarah's spending as an indictment of his failure, her laughter as a cruel mockery of his desperation. The children's needs, so innocent and natural, felt like a constant drain. The life he had curated had become a monster, consuming him piece by piece. There was only one way to escape it, one final, brutal design. That night, a cold, dry wind howled through the neighborhood, rattling the windows and whispering through the bare trees. The house was still. David lay in bed, Sarah's warm breath a soft rhythm beside him. He did not feel love or even hatred, just a profound, empty stillness. He rose quietly, moving with the practiced grace of a man who had long walked through his life unnoticed. He descended the stairs, his bare feet silent on the wood. He went to the garage, retrieved the small red can of lighter fluid he used for the grill, and returned upstairs. The plan was simple, a stark, elegant solution to a complex problem. He would not have to live with the shame of bankruptcy, the humiliation of failure. He would be free. The smell of gasoline was sharp in the still air. He poured a line from the doorway to the bed, a final, lethal border between his past and future. With a practiced flick of his wrist, he ignited a match. The flame was a small, fragile thing, but when it touched the liquid, it blossomed into a living, roaring entity. The heat was instantaneous, an inferno that consumed the room with a hunger that was almost primal. He saw Sarah's silhouette stir, saw the sudden, dawning terror in her eyes, but he did not feel it. He backed away, the lighter fluid on his hand catching fire for a searing, brilliant moment. He heard the muffled coughs, the final, desperate pleas, and he felt nothing. He descended the stairs, walked out the front door, and stood on the lawn, the rising smoke a plume of silent triumph against the dark sky. When the neighbors and the fire department arrived, he was a perfect portrait of devastation, his face streaked with soot and his body trembling with what appeared to be grief. He had played his part perfectly. Detective Miller stood on the scorched front lawn, the smell of burnt wood and chemicals still thick in the air. The fire marshal had been quick to label it an electrical accident, citing a frayed wire in the master bedroom. The community, still reeling, accepted the conclusion with a collective sigh of sorrow. But Miller, a man who had spent 3 decades staring into the abyss of human cruelty, knew that a tragedy felt different from a crime. David Sterling's grief was a performance, polished and rehearsed. The tears came, but they seemed to have no root in his soul. He spoke of his family with a strange, detached formality, as if he were reading their eulogy from a textbook. Miller saw a man who had lost his life but not his humanity. David, he suspected, was a man who had lost his humanity long before that night. He began his own quiet investigation, a shadow cast over the official narrative. He interviewed the neighbors who all said the same thing, a great guy, a quiet man. Kept to himself but always friendly. He spoke to Sarah's friends who offered a more nuanced picture. Sarah had been planning to leave him. The marriage had been a cold battlefield for years. She had confessed to a close friend that David was emotionally distant, that he saw their children as a nuisance rather than a gift. The friend had warned her that he was a man who didn't let go, who saw his family as a possession. Miller found her words chilling. Then there were the financial records. A single subpoena revealed the truth behind the polished facade. David Sterling was not a successful architect. He was a man drowning in debt. His firm was days away from defaulting on a loan, and the bankruptcy proceedings would have wiped him out completely. But the most damning detail was the insurance policy. A $5 million payout on the lives of his wife and 2 children, a policy he had taken out just 6 months prior. The motive was clear, but Miller knew it wasn't the whole story. The financial desperation was a match, but the fire had been fueled by something much more personal, something much darker. The real breakthrough, the one that broke the case open, came not from a spreadsheet but from a small, charred artifact. A junior detective, sifting through the remains, had found Lily's school backpack, its contents miraculously preserved by the fire's capricious nature. Tucked between a crumpled math worksheet and a drawing of a smiling unicorn was another portrait. It was a crayon drawing of her family. Sarah and Lily stood together, holding hands, their faces rendered in cheerful yellows and reds. Sam was playing with a ball, his face a simple, happy circle. And in the background, a tall, shadowy figure stood apart from them, his face a blank, empty space, a void of silence in a world of color. The figure was David, and in that simple drawing Lily had perfectly captured the truth of her father, the man who was physically present but emotionally absent, a silent observer in the life he was supposed to be a part of. Miller brought David in for questioning a final time. The interrogation room was a sterile, unforgiving space. Miller didn't lead with the finances or the insurance. He simply laid the drawing on the table between them. David stared at it, his face a perfect mask of polite confusion. "You said you tried to save them, David," Miller said softly. "But this drawing, it tells a different story. It looks like your daughter saw you as someone who wasn't really there." For a long moment there was only silence. Then a flicker of something passed over David's face, not pain, not grief, but a profound, cold resentment. The mask he had so carefully constructed began to crack. He didn't respond to Miller's question about the drawing. Instead he started to talk about his wife. "Sarah," he began, his voice flat, emotionless. "She was difficult, always wanting more. More things, more attention, more of my time. As if my work, the life I was building for us, wasn't enough." He spoke of her not as his partner, but as a project he had failed to complete. He complained about the children, how they were a distraction, how they were a financial drain, how they had taken all of his time and energy. He described them not as people, but as obstacles in his path to a life of quiet freedom. He had been planning the fire for months. He had spent hours on the internet studying fire patterns, reading articles about accidental home fires, researching how to make it look like a tragic mistake. He had perfectly planned the crime, but he had failed to account for the simple, unvarnished truth of a child's drawing. He had not killed them out of desperation but out of a profound, narcissistic rage. He hadn't wanted to save them. He had wanted to erase them. The confession was a chilling, detached thing. It was not filled with remorse or tears, but with a cold, almost clinical description of his actions. The burns on his hands were not from a rescue attempt, but from the lighter fluid splashing back as he lit the fire. The tears on his face were for his failed plan, not for his lost family. David Sterling, the quiet man from the cul-de-sac, was not a man who had lost his family to tragedy. He was a man who had lost himself to a darkness so deep, he was willing to burn down his entire world just to get out. The case of David Sterling sent a shockwave through the idyllic suburb. The neighbors were left to grapple with the realization that the man they had trusted, the quiet neighbor who had always waved, was a monster. The facade of the American dream had been burned away, revealing a hollow core of debt and a profound, pathological narcissism. The memory of the Sterling family was left to be reconstructed in the collective grief of a community that had been shattered. In the end, it was not the fire that revealed the truth. It was a child's drawing, a simple crayon portrait that told the only truth that mattered. David Sterling had been a man without a face, and in the end he had lost his world because of a single silent crayon. The quiet man from the cul-de-sac would now live the rest of his life in a world of sound and fury, a world of bars and concrete, a world he had created for himself.